decrepit, harder hall loomed like a relic from a forgotten era. Its windows, shattered like opened wounds, gaped beneath the moonlit sky, its paint peeled from the summer heat. Warping plywood sealed every entrance, boarded up to conceal its past. Jared and his friend, Alex, stood at the entrance of the abandoned hotel. Its history shrouded in darkness, its secrets locked within its walls. Using crowbars, the pair pried away the plywood that barred the entrance. They remained there, only peering in as they gathered their equipment. They breathed in heavy, musty air that clung to their lungs. The dampness of decay and neglect hung in every breath. Black mold crept up its walls. Layers of dust coated the abandoned building materials. The hotel has had several owners since its closure in the 80s, with each attempt ending as abruptly as the last, shrouded in rumors and untimely deaths. Every owner since the 80s had died in strange circumstances. "It seems the hotel wants to die in peace," Jared said as he videoed himself telling its story. "Or maybe it needs their souls to stay alive," said Alex. The two looked at each other and laughed. "Let's get this show on the road," Alex finished. "After you." Jared stood aside and waved Alex to go through. "No way. The last one in is the first one out, don't you know?" Alex quipped. "You're right. A man has to lead." He smiled. "You can follow." They both jostled each other to get inside first. A bat flew around above their heads as they stepped into the hotel. They were uneasy. The darkness itself plays tricks on the mind. The mind plays its own tricks as well. The light of the flashlights plays tricks with the shadows. Knowing the history of a place and then going into that place at night can send chills down the spine of even the bravest of persons. This one was no different. Their heart rates had already risen upon entering. "Radio check," Alex said, talking into the radio. It squealed, being in close proximity of the other radio. "Not so close, my dude," Jared said, holding his hands over his ears. As they've always done, each would go in their own direction through the hotel. They believed they got more activity when they were alone, each recording and speaking into the camera as they walked around. Jared went left down the corridor, while Alex went right towards the Great Hall. "See you on the other side," Jared said, waving as Alex drew away. "One of us may not make it," Alex said. A sly smile rose across his lips. Jared gathered his nerve and began walking, his light shining down the hall. He looked back as Alex faded away in the darkness. "Here we are, folks. The glorious, haunted Harder Hall Hotel," he said, as his body began to tense in anticipation of what they may experience tonight. A door near the end of the hall squealed softly against its rusting hinges. "Here we go," Jared whispered into the camera. "It's already begun." Jared looked back towards the great hall. He could see Alex's light sweeping the area. The door at the end of the hall banged lightly against its frame, causing Jared to return his attention back to the door at the end of the hall. His breath rasped in his throat. A bead of sweat dripped from his forehead. Jared could already feel they were going to have an exciting night. He shivered, although it was 83 degrees outside. "Is there anyone here?" he asked, mainly for the sake of the video. "Can you give me some sort of sign?" The door creaked open. It could just be the air pushing the door, but he didn't think so. Jared paused, his eyes and mind zoned in on that door. Everything else was a blur. He began to breathe again, after forgetting to. His light flickered, and he shook it. "I want to see you," he said. He wanted to provoke it, to make it angry, but decided he would wait just a little longer. After all, he was already getting activity. Maybe he wouldn't have to provoke the spirits. The door banged softly against its frame. None of the doors had knobs on them, so none of the doors could close. From the same room, something metallic hit the floor. Jared began to wonder if there might be squatters in the building. "Okay," he said, "but I've got people who want to see you. Thousands of people." Again, the door banged against its frame. The hairs on his arm stood straight up. His voice cracked. "I'm coming, whether you like it or not." This time, the door opened wider, its hinges groaning and then slammed against its frame. Jared swallowed hard, his hands clenching the camera and flashlight. His eyes wide, unblinking, stared down the long, dark hallway. His jaw tightened, his breathing short. "Here we go, guys," Jared said, creeping towards the end of the hall, not making a sound. As he neared the door creaked. It was beginning to open. Back down the hall, the sound of a piano began to play. He could barely hear it, but it most definitely was a piano. He reached for the door, the camera visibly shaking, and he looked back down the hallway where the music was coming from. Jared pulled his walkie-talkie. "You hearing music down there?" "Yeah, it's coming from the Great Hall here, but I can't place it. It's like it's all around me. It's freaking me out." "I'll be there in a sec. I've got some shit down here as well," Jared said. Jared pushed open the door. It creaked as he opened it. The flashlight cut through the darkness. Then he took a step inside. Jared covered his nose and mouth, turned, and looked for the source of the smell. Lifting a tattered shirt in the corner of the room hid the remains of a dead rat. He released the shirt. He noticed the windows were still intact, not a crack in them. From the hall, he began to hear footsteps coming in his direction. Jared turned off his light, thinking Alex was coming. He wanted to scare him, so he crept up to the door. He jumped out into the hall, turning on his flashlight as he did. There was nothing there. Back in the room, something outside caught his attention. It was just a glimpse, but it looked like a shadow of a man, but where no shadow should have been. Jared picked up his radio, meaning to contact Alex, but as he did, the door slammed behind him. He jumped, the radio hitting the floor. He picked up the radio and turned around back towards the door in one motion, his eyes wide. There was nothing there. He began to detect a slight sulfur smell. His nose upturned and sniffed the air, trying to pinpoint its location. From down the hall, Alex screamed. It was a horrific scream that Jared hadn't heard before. The door slammed hard again as Jared raced towards the door. He pulled it open. There had been some force, he thought, holding it closed. His heart leaped up as he rushed back, stumbling towards the entrance. The camera bobbed, and another door slammed right beside him. His heart leaped into his throat. Another door slammed on his left, and he stumbled and fell to the ground. His heart hammered against his chest, a frantic rhythm that echoed in his ears. His limbs trembled uncontrollably, betraying his attempt to move. He jumped up and ran to where Alex should have been. Inside, the great hall was Alex's flashlight. Its light was still on, but lying on the floor. The music had stopped. There was no piano in the great hall. There was nothing at all. "Alex," he shouted, his eyes wide, sweat pouring from his head. His breathing was becoming erratic. He shouted again as he searched the kitchen area just beyond the hall. Rusted storage racks, rags, and empty buckets of paint were scattered about. From the corner of his eye, he saw a dark, shadowy form billowing and growing. He stuttered and garbled a noise from his throat and began to run. The flashlight on the floor was now rolling in circles. He could feel heat swelling up behind him, the smell of sulfur surrounding him. Images of Alex rushed through his mind, and yet all he wanted to do was to get out. He turned back to look. Something screamed an unearthly sound, and it was coming towards him. It was the dark, shadowy form. It was becoming human. He turned back towards the exit. A black cloud was beginning to form there. He ran towards it, hoping to leap through it. It billowed and puffed. Jared's breath seized. His legs trembled. His eyes desperately pleaded for another way out. He stopped and turned, shifting on his legs, unable to make up his mind where he wanted to go. The camera fell to the floor. His knees gave out. He began choking on the billowing black mass and fell forward. His head hit the concrete. Blood seeped from his nose, ears, and mouth. He thought he heard Alex scream again, then faded into darkness. Many residents in the area called the police and reported they heard screaming from the hotel. However, once the police arrived, they found nothing. The two boys were never found. Only a dead flashlight and a video recorder were ever recovered. When they played back the video, there was nothing there but white noise. The hotel remains silent for now, but there will be a moment in time when it will be hungry again. If you attempt to enter Harder Hall, you may never find anything, but then again, you may never be found.